What is the greatest unsolved mystery of all time? DB Cooper. Dude steals money off a government plane. Asks for a parachute. Jumps from the plane never to be seen again. Ducking legend. It was just a passenger plane actually. He hijacked it. Forced it to land and asked for parachutes and money, which he was given. Allowed off all the passengers and gave the pilots a perfectly plotted flight route to follow at low altitude, where he jumped out somewhere over a forest. The DC-9 had a unique door where the tail cone opens outwards, ideal for jumping out of. Never found the guy, which a newspaper erroneously identified as DB Cooper. His real name isn't known, but they did find some of the money they gave to him washed up on the banks of a river nearby around 30 years later. Most experts are of the opinion that he likely died at some point early on in his little adventure. But still no evidence has been found. He was considered quite a nice bloke as hijackers go. Not causing harm to anyone, and seemed to have quite some knowledge of the DC-9 and more than likely an ex-paratrooper. Probably working within the aviation industry. Quite an interesting mystery by all accounts. A mystery that really intrigues me is the Indus Valley civilization. They were large, well-planned cities on the banks of the river Indus. They had an advanced sanitation system and their people were great designers, builders. Eventually the people started to abandon the cities, or maybe they perished. The cities were excavated years later by archaeologists. No one has been able to exactly pinpoint the cause of the destruction of the cities. There are multiple theories though. They had an entire script that no one has been able to translate. The archaeologists have unearthed idols, buildings, utensils, money, coins. It's just interesting how they just ceased to exist for so many years. Edit. Redditors who are saying that Indus Valley civilization is from Pakistan. Please note that it was a group of cities. While the major cities, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, are in Pakistan. India does have some of the smaller cities like Dhalavira and Rakhigarhi. Also, thanks for my highest voted comment ever. Where does the voice in your head that you used to think inwards come from? Is the voice the real you? Would a person who never heard a language be conscious in the same way you think of yourself as conscious? If the word voice in our heads is our consciousness, do the subtleties and variations between languages imply different types of consciousness? When you talk, think who is the listener. I'm not high enough for that comment. My most recent favorite. If the Great Sphinx is only about 4,500 years old, then why does it show weather inconsistent with the much wetter climate in the region 10k plus years ago? Maybe the Egyptians decided just to thoroughly wash it once a year. I imagine a bunch of Egyptians in bikinis and pharaoh headdresses doing like a sexy car wash thing with the Sphinx. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, Boston. Theft of 13 oil paintings worth $500 million. The 18th of March, 1990, still unsolved. SUEDU. They are sitting in the private collection of some rich guy. Mystery solved. What was here before the universe began 13 billion years ago? If we're going with the Big Bang model, this question is nonsensical because there was no before. Time started with the universe itself. The contents of the library at Alexandria. Unfortunately that's unsolvable. What if we get a time machine? Steal it all. Burn it down to cover our tracks. And bring it back with us. That went wrong the first time. Why my wife has stayed with me for 34 years. IMO, the Battle of Los Angeles. Long story short, an object was spotted hovering slowly over LA during WWII. The entire Los Angeles anti-aircraft battery engaged it for like an hour, thinking it was a Japanese aircraft but couldn't damage it. Then after a while it just disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. It is funny to think that if that was a UFO, I don't, that we scared them. What an impression to leave. They are just hovering and watching. Thinking what the hell are they doing, tiny eating sounds. If the universe is constantly expanding, then what is at the edge of space? There must be a finite end at any given second as it expands. So what is it expanding into? What is outside of space as we know it? I've been wondering this for years. Voiced it once. and was told I was an idiot because space is the outside of space. I don't think they understood my question. Or perhaps I phrased it poorly. It's not expanding into anything. The space between things is getting bigger. There's not really any way to understand it except mathematically. There's nothing else in our experience that does the same thing. Honestly, that explanation helps me understand better than what I was picturing. Instead of a black sphere growing infinitely, I'm now imagining galaxies just drifting farther apart. A couple of nights ago some rustlers stole approximately 1,500 geese from a farm. They managed to do it without getting caught and without any of the geese making a noise. They also had to presumably drive some lorries up big enough to take them all, but nobody saw or heard anything. Where did they go? How did they do it? Where do the socks go? In my house. They shapeshift into wire hangers. Lori Erica Ruff's real identity. Long story short. After this Texas woman committed suicide, her ex-husband and children found this box with all sorts of weird papers and stuff, basically proving that she wasn't who she said she was. Turns out nobody has figured out who she actually was. There are guesses as to where she came from, but no one knows for sure. I was going to say the disappearance of Amelia Earhart, but apparently they realized they might have actually found her remains like 76 years ago. Google.com. Earhart was clearly whisked away to the Delta Quadrant by aliens as shown in the first show of season 2 on Star Trek Voyager, the 37s. Doesn't anyone pay attention to history anymore? The case of the missing Beaumont children. It happened in my state of Australia in 1966 on Australia Day, the 26th of January. A mother allowed her 3 children aged 9, 7 and 4 to catch the bus to the local beach for the afternoon, provided they were home by about 3 p.m. Apparently the oldest, Jane, was quite responsible and it was normal to allow children to do things like that back then. The mother gave them some shillings and pence. This was when Australia still used British, but not a £1 note. The children got there successfully and were seen playing with a surfer-looking man on the grassy knoll near the beach and later went off with him. They were seen by a few people, the man and the deli that they stopped to buy pies and pastries at, with a £1 note. This is why it was important to say that they weren't give a £1 note, and by the local postman who they called out and waved to. After that they simply vanished. Nothing of them has ever been found. Their bodies, their clothing, no beach towels, not even the paperback copy of Little Women that Jane had on her has ever been found. Essentially they disappeared off the face of the earth. It's often described as the day Adelaide, the city, lost its innocence. What makes the mystery even more freaky is that in 1973, 7 years later, there was another frightening and mysterious disappearances of children. This time 2 young girls, previously unknown to each other, Tracy Gordon, 4 and Joan Ratcliffe, 11, went missing from a state football match. They were seen with a man briefly before they vanished, who eerily matched the description of the man seen with the Beaumont children 7 years earlier. Much like the Beaumonts, the bodies of those children nor anything from on their person has ever been found. There are theories on both cases, but the most prevalent and mostly accepted as truth, though no one can be sure as both cases are completely unsolved, is that the assumed murders, along with a few other murders and disappearances of children that occurred interstate, were committed by the same man. Many believe there was a serial killer of children who was never caught and for many years was wandering around abducting and murdering children right under the nose of the public, as the Beaumonts and the 2 girls were in highly public places. TLDR, there was possibly a child serial killer in Australia in the 1960s and 70s who has never been caught. Disappearances of the Malaysian flights. They don't have any flight data. It went offline and poof, whole plane vanishes. And one day all the media just stopped covering it. Weirdest moment of my life. Everyone just stopped talking about it like it never existed. That's called losing interest. After the networks already talked it to death. Nobody cared anymore. So they stopped covering it. Was there a second gunman on the 22nd of November, 1963? Also, is Air Day with SpongeBob SquarePants lost forever? Or Was JFK not Oswald's intended target? Don't have a source handy, but read speculation he may have been aiming for the governor in the car. Gov. Connolly was previously Secretary of the Navy, and allegedly Oswald wrote him a letter asking him to look into his discharge. Oswald, who the KGB claimed was too unstable to work with, became enraged from the perceived slight of Connolly ignoring him and wanted to kill him. Hard to reconcile the fact that one has the President of the United States in your crosshairs but this person wants to kill someone else. But you always hear about how impossible fantastical the shot was. So maybe Oswald missed? Where I got my height from. Dad is 5 feet 8 inches and mom 5 feet 5 inches. I'm over 6. No one else in family is over 5 minutes and 10 seconds. Who's my real father? How tall is your milkman? What is this? The 60s? The Bowman children. A missing kids case that has intrigued me for years. Wikipedia.org. This is beyond tragic. The parents are still alive. 88 and 90 years old. What a truly awful way to live 50 years. I'm amazed neither died sooner of heartbreak. F it. This will be buried. But here are some of my favorites from back in the day that were ruined by logic. D.B. Cooper. He very likely died in the woods that night. Lost Roanoke Colony. There were years between when they were last seen and more years before any investigation took place. And keep in mind the word the English found carved was the name of a nearby island. And they didn't go look. They went back to England, an already struggling colony left on its own for all those winters. Not too mysterious. Edit, and the colonists had a signal to communicate if they were forcibly removed. Carve a cross. But instead they carved the name of the island where they probably moved to. But no one looked there for years. Dyatlov Pass. Avalanche, paradoxical undressing, scavenger critters, and either the radiation was a tabloid fabrication or cross-contamination. Who'da thunk 1950s Soviet Union CSI wasn't up to snuff? Jack the Ripper. My favorite theory is a German sailor who was executed in the US for a very similar crime. He told his lawyer he had a fundamental hatred of women and couldn't stop himself from killing. The boat he was frequently crewed to was docked in London at the time of the killings. However, the records for the time in question are missing, so we can't confirm he was in London. Damn. Zodiac. I thought we settled on Ted Cruz. Can't believe how far I scrolled and nobody mentioned the Roanoke lost colony. A whole colony just up and disappears. Funny how the nearby Indian tribe suddenly gained loads of light-skinned members and mixed children. Even though this lacks a serious tack, I'm going to post a serious answer. Though there's no proof it ever even happened. Spring-heeled Jack. It's pretty widely considered an old Victorian-era urban legend at this point. And some kind of sensational boogeyman story. The first attacks, allegedly, took place in Lavender Hill where your typically rappy Gropperson MO played out. Except that Mr. Gropperson, allegedly, leapt straight over a carriage and then over a 9-foot wall before disappearing. Some accounts say that he spat blue flames and had glowing red eyes and all kinds of other crazy monster traits, but those are widely acknowledged to be fanciful imaginings. It was serious enough at the time that the Mayor of London was willing to at least partially acknowledge the goings-on, admitting the attacks had happened. But not that Gropperson McCreepy was any kind of literal monster, and the Duke of Wellington took to patrolling his neighborhood at night to protect young women. The character seeped into the public consciousness and had starring roles in Penny Dreadfuls and Punch and Judy puppet shows for decades. If even half the stories are to be believed. He traveled all over the country scaring the willies out of women and children, pestering security guards, kicking dogs, and generally being a right bastard and a nuisance in 1837 until the last reported sighting in 1904. Here are some artists, Wikimedia org renderings. And if you're incredibly fortunate you might be able to dig up some of the Times articles on the attacks as well. Edit, typo. My favorite is the Dyatlov Pass incident. A group of experienced skiers in the Ural Mountains all died. Presumably from hypothermia. They suffered physical trauma of some unknown strong force. which many believed to be an avalanche. But evidence could not prove an avalanche even occurred. Their tent had been ripped open from the inside. Their bodies were highly radioactive. One member of the group had her tongue cut out, and others shows internal damage without evidence of external damage. There was also no indication of anyone else being there, which would suggest an attack. I should probably share the mystery of the Egyptian granite cylinder. In Abalsi, former part of the antique Egyptian empire, archaeologists have found a strange hole near a granite door. It's cylinder shaped, and the corresponding granite cylinder have been found nearby. Nothing unusual or exciting, you'll say. Now, the interesting detail about this cylinder is that there is a perfect spiral all along its surface. The spiral matches perfectly the spiral that can be seen inside the hole. Therefore, we can assume this mark results from the way the cylinder was carved from the stone. Why is it a mystery? Because granite is a very ducking hard stone. Even with nowadays technologies, carving such a regular piece with that kind of accuracy is difficult and cannot be done by a regular tool. By the time this cylinder was carved, Egyptians had little knowledge of metals, mostly using copper, which is not as hard as granite. That means a copper tool would be destroyed before even scratching the stone. Even with diamond head, with a mechanical tool, it would have taken the ages for a simple cylinder. And this accuracy is absolutely unreachable with said tool. All scientists tried to figure out a way Egyptians dug into granite with that much accuracy, but no one has succeeded. From everything we know about Egyptians, they were ducking and able to do so. Lots of theories about that, aliens, former civilization, but absolutely no answer. More details, hidden in kitters.com. Edit, link. The guys that escaped from Alcatraz. I like to think they survived and lived a good life. Devil's Kettle in Minnesota is a place where a stream splits. Half goes down a waterfall, and half goes into the kettle. No one knows where it goes, but it is said that some people once put a car down it. It never came out. Also, scientists put dye in the water, but to no avail. Cicada 3301. Google that sheet. I'm too scared itless since it's 2 AM and the lights are off. PLS, some kind person tell me what that is. Doesn't seem too scary tbh. According to Wikipedia, Cicada 3301 is a name given to an enigmatic organization that on 6 occasions has posted a set of complex puzzles and alternate reality games to recruit codebreakers from the public. Some seem to believe it to be a cult. Others think that it has to do with recruitment for highly intelligent individuals toward top organizations. IDK. I just ran it down real quick. Seems that the puzzles require physical movement out of the person trying to solve it by hitting up different cities and locations though. Serious, what is the deepest, darkest secret you found out about a friend that really messed with your head? Not really a very dark secret, but I had a friend that had many friends outside of school. People would always call him and ask him to hang out every day. Turns out he had an app that would fake call you with the names you put in. He would have actual conversations on the phone, with no one on the other side. Obviously, he felt that having no friends or girlfriends outside of school was embarrassing. Edit, just search for fake call. There will be multiple apps for this purpose. This girl I knew in high school who was on the same rugby team as me. Ever since the spring season started, she began showing up to practice more and more infrequently. Coaches always told us to stop asking about her and never said anything against her not showing up, while giving shit to other players who slacked off. Cut to our quarterfinals tournament in a couple of weeks, and she finally shows up, except she's crying. She's still determined to play though and plays aggressively well against the other teams. I find out after that she lived in a physically abusive household and she finally got emancipated that week. Throughout the 2 years I had known her, she never gave any indication of anything like that. And as far as I know, no one else knew what was happening either. It came as a total surprise to me and really opened my eyes. Because it made me wonder for the first time if anyone else I knew was being covertly abused at home. Edited because I can't spell. One of the funniest, most enjoyable guys to be around in high school had a paraplegic brother who was slowly dying throughout our time together. Only found out after we graduated and lost contact that he even had a brother and that he had died a few nights before prom. Really put a different perspective of all the memories we had together and the fun times we had. All the while he was quietly dealing with this by himself. Really hit me hard when I found out. One of my best friends has a severe fear towards tools. After her noticing me noticing it, she finally told me about it. Turns out her brother tried to kill her several times growing up. He's gotten arrested multiple times for assault with and without weapons, etc. Their mom was essentially a single parent, and rather than dealing with it, she just told her he was only playing and wouldn't actually do it. Nothing like insane siblings and good parenting. I worked at a coffee shop with a woman who was considerably older than myself. She's the most lovely, kind-hearted, and friendly person I've met. And she was sort of a motherly figure to me. I don't know how this came up in conversation. But one day she told me she cheats on her husband with her ex-husband every chance she gets. I just don't know how to feel about that. A colleague I'd been friendly with for 5+ years faked having cancer. Shaved head. Gaunt makeup. Even a cane. I'd always bring her meals. Wear the solidarity ribbon. Offer to cover for her if she wasn't feeling well and needed to go home. Finally, one of the other faculty members informed me it was all aroused. They all knew and had stopped feeding into it years ago. But whenever they confronted her about it, she denied it. I went to visit my at the time best friend. After we hadn't seen each other for a while, I asked about her smaller dog, who wasn't at the house anymore. Backstory about this dog. He was bought as a puppy, and when his owner was going through a divorce, he put the dog in a basement, and the only interactions he had with people were ones of abuse. So over time he became aggressive toward people. The original owner was putting him down, and my friend decided to rescue and rehab him. She had him for a couple of years. And when I went to see her, he wasn't there anymore. So when I asked what happened, she apparently had gotten pissed that he peed on the carpet. Decided to drive him to a dirt road by the airport and leave him there. She laughed when she told me that he ran after the car. You know. In a way where you could tell she expected me to find it funny too. I was livid. Shaking. Left and never talked to her again. IDK if that counts exactly, but it did with my head. And still does. That they were physically violent with several of their partners. My best friend in high school once beat the shit out of a girl he dated. And threatened her with violence a ton of other times. I only found out about that about a year later when the girl told me. Let's just say I didn't remain friends with that guy. I went to high school with a guy who turned out to be a child molester. He was wanted by Interpol for human trafficking as well. In school he was a nice, quiet guy who always showed up for whatever he was involved in. We were in a few clubs together and I never, ever picked up on an odd vibe. I feel like I'm pretty good with reading people, but this is the one that completely got by me. This was years ago. But I learned from another classmate that my friend's parents were intentionally starving her for some reason unbeknownst to us at the time. She was naturally tiny, so I didn't realize. But then her behavior started to change and I knew that she wasn't being treated right. After a while, the younger sister told us that their parents wanted her to be skinny, at 12 ducking years old, to look beautiful for an older guy that they'd arranged to be her husband. I don't really know what became of it, seeing as I'm no longer in contact with any of my primary school friends. But I can only hope that she's doing well, and that her sister didn't have to follow in her footsteps. Two of my best friends share the same dad. They're a ducking month apart. But I love them both so much. I've been in both of their weddings. My cousin was my best friend. She was a year older than me. Loved anime and would stay up with me to binge watch Inuyasha or other girly shows. Her and her brother even lived with us for a couple years after CPS took them from their mom. She said we would always be friends and our kids would grow up with each other like we did. Turns out she used to also love molesting my little sister. Found that out last year. My sister begged me not to confront her. What did she have to say about? I'm sorry I did that to you, but I can't remember most of it. All those red flags of my sister trying to switch rooms and the huge personality change she showed after my cousin moved in. All this time I thought she was jealous. Now that cousin is pregnant. Lies to everyone saying that my family used to abuse her and that she had to run away to a better life. Also, how she loves her mom so much even though all she did for the 10 years her kids were living with us was give my mom $100 and a box of plastic tableware. I had a friend from work who was older than me. We worked on the bar and spent a lot of time together and became good friends. He had a twin brother who he always wanted me to meet. He used to like a party and would often tell stories of mad acid fueled parties he had been to, and we often went out and had a few wild ones. He was a friendly upbeat guy but used to change in a second's notice and became unbearably angry and rude. He used to have these mood swings quite regularly, and I started to notice that when he was happy he would refer to his twin brother as the more serious one, and when he was angry his brother would be the upbeat and happy one. One Christmas he brought his family in to show them the restaurant we were working, and his brother never came nor existed. I had a close friend in the 8th grade who clearly had an extremely strained relationship with her mother. Constant fighting, defiance, anger, etc. Any semblance of a bond was simply non-existent. I always wondered what was up. But, in my youth, chalked it up to, well, we all hate our parents. One day, during a phone conversation, I don't know what topic of conversation preceded it, her voice began to crack. And she told me, when I was 9 years old, in the summer, my mother told me I was out of control and needed to be helped. She drove me to the hospital. And before dropping me off, told me I'll visit you on the weekends. It was a mental hospital. Oopie. The needles they used on those people when they freaked. I stayed there for a few weeks. My father had to fight to get me out. I don't remember exactly what I said, except that I was so sorry. Mostly I just wanted to hug her until she didn't need to cry anymore. This pops into my head from time to time. We lost touch. I hope life is treating her okay. One of my friends over a long time on WoW suddenly went missing on raid night. I asked one of his IRL friends what happened. Turns out he got locked up for murdering someone. Never saw him again. There was a girl from a major guild on my old server who apparently used to get drunk and rage on her guildies all the time. I quit playing for a while, and when I came back I didn't see her at all. I asked what happened to her and a bunch of people told me she was murdered. University in my halls of residence. Made friends with a guy who was into heavy metal music. He was quite different compared to myself. Me sporty, involved in university football team etc. He was big into his pot and metal music. But I talk to anyone, and if you're not a big dig I don't care how you dress or what music you like etc. He had come from the other side of the country and I could tell he felt quite lonely and was just about surviving financially. So I used to invite him into my room with other friends, and it would always end up me and him talking about conspiracy theories and all sorts till the early hours. When we were going out I would drag him out with me and I would stick a 20 or so in his pocket and say, when you make it big, he was a musician, you can give me a backstage pass. I started a cook-off with him in the halls as he wasn't sure how to cook, so gave him a few recipes and he ran with it. He was a great guy. We liked totally different things but at the same time connected. Anyway, one of these nights I forced him out because he was looking homesick in his room. He was drunk and we were walking home. He put his arm around me and said, "You know, if it wasn't for you I wouldn't be here right now." Me thinking he was referring to him being out and drunk, I said, "I know you were tough to persuade to come out." He responds, "No. Not this, I mean you saved me so many times and you don't know it." Being confused I asked what he meant. "Dude, I'm so unhappy here, I've thought about suicide and at times gone to do it. Only for you to come in and start talking to me. Or you forced me to come out. I never wanted to be here. My parents forced me here. I just wanted to end it all. I was drunk and a bit in shock and said back that he should never end it over being somewhere you don't want to be. Doing something you don't want to do. You can change that by just dropping out and doing something you really want to do. No one would see you as a failure but as someone who has the gonads to go against the flow and chase the dream of what they want to do. I remember him looking straight at me and he smiled and nodded at me. He then motioned to the takeaway and asked if I wanted anything he was buying. He then laughed and said, well, it's your money. A few weeks later we broke for Christmas and we all went back to where we came from for the holidays. He rang me and he was in the car with a friend driving back to university to get his stuff he was leaving. I remember him sounding so relieved. He thanked me for everything. It was only later I realized the difference I made. And it messed my head a little bit. Started thinking how if I hadn't have been the way I was, what would have happened and the knock-on effect it would have had for me and his family. Hope you're doing well, Jim, and rocking it. My childhood best friend's mom was Miss Perfect. Always had the best snacks made for play dates. House was perfectly neat. Hair perfectly combed. She was everyone's softball coach. Girl Scout leader. Class mom. Everything. My mom said when she used to see her when picking us kids up from school. Her mom's breath always smelled perfectly minty fresh. Like she was so perfect. I am in college now and recently attended her funeral. She was a raging alcoholic. Her breath always smelled minty fresh from mouthwash to cover up the stench of her drink. She literally killed herself with alcohol. So sad. Literally what seemed like the perfect woman was killing herself over the span of 10 years. I have no idea what she was going through to this day. RIP. Edit. I used literally twice. Get off my case. I found out my so has a fetish for morbidly obese women. I'm talking rolls upon rolls. Probably 600 lb plus. He doesn't know that I know. Dash. I have been trying to lose weight. And he keeps poking fun at my strange diet. I feel like he isn't going to be attracted to me when I reach my goal weight. Yeah. I feel like the fact that he's still with you is a good indicator that physical attraction isn't a priority to him and that obese women is just a small, lol, fetish to him. I went to high school in a small, affluent suburban town. I knew this girl. We weren't that close but we had some mutual friends so we were occasionally hanging in the same circles. She was quiet. A good student. That type. Years later she became a public advocate for children who had been sold into prostitution. It turned out starting from the age of 10, so the entire time I knew her. Plus more, her parents had been forcing her into prostitution. This was apparently going on weeknights after school. It ducked me up so bad to imagine what she must have been going through. While still having to go to school and being a great student. And it ducked me up even more to think this could be happening in my own hometown. But the thing that really ducked me up the most was that her parents used the money from this to pay for her to go to college, one of the most prestigious public universities in the US. Like in some ducked up way they thought they were helping her. Scarred me for life. That she was a user. She used other people to her advantage, mostly monetarily, but also emotionally. She'd get with guys she knew liked her and have them buy her expensive things before breaking things off with them. I found out accidentally when she had a little too much to drink one day and gleefully told me what she'd done while talking shit about all those guys, calling them stupid, annoying, etc. We'd been best friends for 2 years at that point and I had no idea she was even capable of doing such things. Because she'd always treated me well. I cut her off completely and to this day she still emails me occasionally telling me of her woe is me stories. To think that I called her my best friend. I knew a guy since freshman year of high school. And then we were roommates for 2 years in college. Nicest guy you could ever meet. Turns out he was a major drug trafficker. When he was finally caught they ended up seizing something like $200,000 worth of cash and prepaid debit cards. The entire time I knew him I had no idea. He drove a 10-year-old car. We lived in a pretty crappy apartment on a mess side of town. and still took out student loans and had a used car loan. Just blew my mind someone so nice and modest could be into something like that. A friend of mine who I have known for probably 15 years dropped a doozy on his circle of friends. He was a perfectly normal dude. A little shy and quiet growing up. But he did well in school. He loved sports. And always came to hang out whenever the group went somewhere. Then he got arrested for tourism because he was videotaping dudes using the urinals at the college he had recently graduated from. Everyone, from all his friends to his siblings to his parents, was shocked that such a mild-mannered, normal dude would do that and never even drop a hint. He ended up getting put on house arrest for a year. I visited a few times. Tried to be really supportive and see him through all of this. But shame seems to have gotten the best of him. He doesn't respond to calls or texts and has just kinda faded away. I've lost touch with him. But his dad is a family friend, so I know he's alive and well. He grew up in a really conservative household and I feel like he just grew up so quiet because his true self was being repressed. Maybe he has always been gay and has been too ashamed to come out. Maybe I'm completely wrong. Who knows? All I know is, either way I'd love him all the same. And I wish he would get in touch. I didn't find out as more of he told me. I grew up in a super sheltered Mormon community, and as you could imagine, all my friends were super sheltered Mormons. I on the other hand was a devil child who left the church at 14. Because of this I got people everything from monsters to porn on flash drives. My best friend Nate, not his real name, asked me to get some hardcore BDSM stuff once and I did without a problem, different strokes for different people. Well, one day he came up to me at school and asked me if I could get him some younger porn, like 16 or 17-year-old kid porn. I promptly told him no, and that day I stopped getting people porn. That my best friend's dad was an alcoholic who would hit her and her mother. Once she told me and our other friend. She refused to tell the police. So nothing permanent has been done about it. She says he's better now and gets drunk less often. But I still can't stop thinking about it. Friend telling me she got an abortion because he didn't want her current BF to be the father of any of her children. They're still together. FBI showed up at best friend's dorm room one day. Overheard them questioning him. He'd been downloading CP and he told them the details and what he'd search for. etc. They'd been tracking his computer for a while. He'd been doing this a long time. Really messed me up. Made me question how I could not have seen it in him, and this questioned nearly every decision I ever made. Still have a hard time coping. Feel serious. Lawyers who have defended clients that had done horrible stuff. How did it make you feel? Some days it's really hard. Defending violent people that have harmed others has desensitized me to violence. I can read reports, see pictures and interview victims with little or no emotional reaction. I found it's a different feeling when assigned cases by the public defender versus meeting with people accused of crimes and taking a lot of their money to represent them. I don't take clients that have hurt kids anymore. A couple in a row ducked me up and I can't compartmentalize my emotions from really analyzing the case. IB to DUI, driving under the influence, case recently, and my client hugged me and his breath reeked of alcohol. At 10 AM. He said he had driven to court. I insisted he let me call an Uber. See? Knowing that he got off scot-free and most likely didn't learn a lesson or get rehabilitated. And knowing he'll be back on the road to possibly injure or kill innocent drivers. I couldn't handle defending that. I've represented robbers, dealers, everybody. But the one crime that I particularly don't like handling is DUI. I have a theory that, for the most part, I can avoid being the victim of most crimes. I don't do drugs. I don't hang out in bad neighborhoods. I lock my car, house etc. But there is absolutely nothing I can do to prevent being held by a drunk driving on the wrong side of the highway with no headlights on. This terrifies me and sickens me. I don't do criminal law anymore, but one summer I worked on a team of public defenders representing a woman who had shot her, reportedly very nice, husband for $60,000 in insurance money. My job was basically just to try to talk her into confessing and taking the plea bargain. Because it was obvious that she'd done it, her fingerprints all over her gum. Her alibi was proven false, etc. But she insisted on this half-cocked story about how it had to have been a burglar and spent all of her time feeling sorry for herself. The prosecutor had offered her 5 years. She insisted on going to trial and got 55. I think she's still there. I'm not a bit sad about it. Should have took the 5 years. Why would it be a good idea to go to trial when you know your bullshit is gonna get you more? She said God would prove her innocent. God would have been a lot more help if she'd considered a consultation before she shot her husband 6 times in the back as he was walking out of the shower. IMHO. I've said this before, but I bailed on family court. Did it for like a month. I had to sit there, expressionless, 4 hours while I listened to some horrid shit involving abuse and justification for it. I took a downgrade to workers' comp until I found something I could live with. That said, God bless everyone involved in family court. During my internship, I was part of a team that defended some persons accused for the conspiracy and execution of a group of journalists. It was hard. But the big thing that people forget is that lawyers don't have to believe in the innocence of the accused. You just have to make sure that justice is done. I personally was racked with guilt and didn't believe it one bit. But somebody has to represent the accused. This is right. A buddy of mine who is from Colombia was stopped at the airport from a trip to South America and they checked some over-the-counter drugs tested positive for being a illegal drug. He got a lawyer to represent him and the lawyer helped him get the drugs retested and they came back negative. Then lawyer got them to dismiss the case. After it all, the lawyer was sorry to my friend. He admitted at first thought he was guilty. He never believed that the brown guy from Colombia that has a substance that is tested to be a illegal drug is innocent. Doesn't matter what the lawyer thinks. If everyone does their job right, it will work out best in long run. Fine. At the end of the day I go home. And if the prosecutor did his job correctly, then that person goes to jail. I'm not going to make it easy for the DA. But I've stopped losing sleep, except when in trial, thinking about it. Over a week, I installed a network for a defense lawyer as he was setting up a new office and we had some pretty candid conversations about all of the garbage he has represented in the past. Near the end, I asked him this exact question. This was his answer. If I've done my job as a defense lawyer, and I've fought for and protected my clients to the absolute best of my ability according to all technical aspects of the law, then when they get that guilty verdict, I know that I've closed up as many loopholes for appeals, mistrials, and ways for them to go free. And that's how I sleep at night. Late to this thread, but I've been a public defender for many years. I find that for me, it's not the crime that I find hard to deal with, it's the person. So I can have someone charged with something really horrible, and I might still like them as a person. Or I could have someone charged with shoplifting, and I think they are a jerk. I have only one case in my mind where I intensely disliked the client and they did really horrible stuff. I worked my ass off, with others, to ensure this person didn't get the death penalty. But if they got struck by lightning one day, I wouldn't be sad. In any case, when you are in lawyer mode, you think like a lawyer, and compartmentalize a bit. There's also a small sense of pride in being committed enough to the cause to handle even the bad stuff. But also, most people charged with crimes are just people. Some are awesome. Some are jerks. Some people do bad things and feel really terrible about it. Others blame everyone else but themselves. Some people are so trapped in their trauma or addiction or mental illness that it overshadows everything. The job is to hold the state to its burden of proof, and to challenge any constitutional violations on behalf of the client. It seems to be difficult for some people. But if you just withhold your own judgment and let the process work, there's no feeling of guilt in it. That said, it can be gross to sit next to some folks. But it's never gross to challenge the state's case and make the argument that there's not enough evidence to convict. It makes me feel goodish if that makes sense. As a lawyer, I do sports law now. But did public defender work to start? You know you have to defend guilty people. I have got people I know are guilty of crimes because it is my job. You become a lawyer not to get rich, though some do. You do it because you know everyone deserves a fair shake. And the same rights. You have to separate yourself from things though. And not bring your work home. For every 10 people that did horrible stuff, you will get one mom who was in a bad place. Or a guy the police got the wrong person. Getting that person off that is not guilty is what drives you. And motivates you continue down the path. The worst people to defend are people that did a shitty thing and think they understand the law. You just want to slap them. First of all, you very rarely know that clients have done horrible things because you make a habit to not ask questions that you don't want answers to. And the number of times I've had clients change their story is staggering, so I go in with an attitude that I don't know the facts. I know only the case the state is trying to make. Even when you do absolutely know that they did it, I have no problem with zealously defending them. It isn't about the individual. It's about the system. The reason that I do what I do is that dirty cops scare the hell out of me. And there are an awful lot of them out there. As soon as we as defense attorneys stop defending people that we think are guilty, the state gets to make cases that they shouldn't based upon bad evidence provided by bad cops. By defending everyone with zeal and vigor regardless of personal feelings, we make sure to the best of our ability that the state is honest. And convicting fewer innocent people. At the end of the day, I feel better about having 10 child rapists go free than having one person falsely convicted and incarcerated for life because he got on the bad side of a bad cop who thinks he is the law. I work in family law. I used to work for a boutique firm that represented high net worth individuals, 90% of whom were reprehensible. I managed to compartmentalize many of their actions, including infidelity and hiding money. But it drained my soul to represent people who I knew were abusive and controlling spouses. And people who use their children as pawns to seek revenge or exert control over their exes. After about 5 years, I was so burned out and depressed, almost suicidal. I quit my job and tried for a long time to find work outside the legal field. Unfortunately, that was basically impossible. So I went back to family law. But in a different capacity. Some of the work I do is in the non-profit sector for low-income clients. And the vast majority of those clients are far more pleasant to deal with than the clients at the fancy law firm. I also work on a freelance basis for rather large private practices. Just piecemeal projects like writing motions, doing research projects, and reviewing discovery. I don't have to deal with any clients directly. So I'm insulated from the drama. I'm thinking of starting my own law firm specializing in mediation and collaborative divorce. I'd much rather work with clients who are into conscious uncoupling, even though it means they won't rack up huge bills. At least I'd feel like I was helping someone at the end of the day, which is the whole reason I wanted to be a lawyer in the first place. My father spent his working life first in criminal defense, 30-ish years, and then prosecution for the remainder of his career. Until he retired early for stress-related reasons. I don't recall any specifics because the worst cases were when I was young and he obviously kept details from us. Suffice to say that he was incredibly stressed throughout his working life. And it gave him a badly colored view of people in general. Once he retired, he worked doing something very manual and highly skilled and was like a different person. Much easier to get on with. Law can do bad things to the people who work in it. I'm a public defender. I don't get to pick my clients or the kinds of cases I get. However, I believe in the mission to give everyone effective assistance of counsel regardless of the amount of money they have. It's a right we all have as Americans, and it's my job to be a champion for the Constitution, so to speak. I do a lot of mental gymnastics to do what I do. I have to separate the person in front of me from the crime they are alleged to have committed. I have to doubt the state's account as much as I can reasonably do so. At the end of the day, I wasn't there. And I don't know for sure what happened. Honestly. It's hardest for me to represent a client who is mean to me personally. If a client is mean or abusive to me, but charged with something less serious or non-violent, that's harder than representing someone who allegedly did something heinous but treats me with respect. I recognize to a certain extent I have to earn their trust, but there's something to be said for treating your lawyer civilly. At the end of the day, none of us are as bad as the worst thing we've ever done. That doesn't excuse our behavior, but I think every person has at least a small amount of redeeming quality that I can use to help me justify my job. Slightly relevant. My mum is a psychologist, and I remember she used to visit prisons when I was growing up as part of work. She wasn't allowed to talk about it due to confidentiality, but I overheard her once talking to my dad. She had just been to see a guy who was doing life for grape. And of course, as part of her job she has to be unbiased and objective despite the severity of the crime. The grape had been brutal. A young woman. But what was significant about this particular case was the fact that 2 weeks prior she had been with a client who matched the profile of the girl he described. And she had recounted the same details about the event. My mum realized she was the psychologist for both the rapist and the victim. I think that was the only time she was ever explicitly affected by her work in front of me. But I suppose you see so many, eventually you just have to separate yourself from the job. But I know seeing the girl made it harder for her to have any kind of empathy for him. Not great. I will help someone who has a contractual right to a defense. But it doesn't make me feel good to know I'm helping someone who, to give a few examples, took advantage of another human being, often sexually, or who is clearly committing fraud. In the end, I tell myself everyone deserves a meaningful defense and that there are two sides to every coin. Lucky for me, these sorts of files are few and far between. I spoke with a defense attorney about this once. She said that she went from prosecution to defense, which is an interesting flip. She stated that she believed everyone had a right to competent legal representation and isn't necessarily trying to get them out of a crime, but trying to make sure that they are accurately navigated through the legal system and that their rights are protected. I thought that was a great explanation. As I said in the other post, as a law student, it's your ethical duty to zealously defend your client. There are a few great books on this, but essentially the very root of this goes back to how Adams represented the soldiers in the Boston Massacre. Everyone deserves defense. My girlfriend is a criminal defense attorney, and I asked this exact question once when we first started dating. She told me is able to compartmentalize really well, but some things definitely get to her. I work as a paralegal in criminal defense. We haven't represented clients who hurt other adults unprovoked, but we have represented a few of what I would call the worst type of people. Child molesters. It's ducking unnerving how they can justify the sheet. I have 3 young children, under the age of 14. And I'm still pretty young myself. Those defendants are master manipulators, and are constantly looking for a way in with you. I keep photos of my children on my desk, not on display, and don't say anything more than absolutely necessary to these people. It annoys me when this topic pops up in the cycle because it quietly implies that some people shouldn't have a good defense lawyer. It assumes that the defendant is always guilty. Maybe the defendant is guilty of something but not of the charges. Maybe the defendant is guilty but not to the same degree. Maybe the police or the prosecution didn't do their jobs properly. Or worse, fabricated evidence or coerced testimony. Maybe the case relies on the appearance of doing wrong leading to a crime, but they are only guilty of being immoral. Or maybe they just didn't do it. While the justice system is far from perfect, everyone should have a fair trial. It really disturbs me that some people are happy and comfortable denying an accused murderer or pedophile a lawyer or even a trial simply because the police put them in cuffs. I didn't feel any particular thing. Me defending them is not me condoning what they did. Everyone needs a defense to make the system work correctly, even and especially the guilty ones. Now there were certainly people I represented who did terrible things and I hated that. But they did those things whether I am exposed to it or not, and someone needed to defend them, and at that time it was my job to do so. Nowadays and for the bulk of my career I've done civil work. But in the early days of my career I did a lot of criminal defense and even did a swim through the Tulsa County Public Defender's Office, where I ended up reviewing the worst of the bad offenders in my career. But also the stories that people mostly want to hear come from that same period of time. Is it unavoidable to work a little less hard as an attorney for people you find repugnant? Or does it make you work even harder to make sure that there can be no basis for appeal? Well, I remember that I am only one part of the system. There is opposing counsel, judge and jury. I present my client's case and don't use my own judgment about it. If I win, then I don't feel bad, I'm doing my job. If I lose, then I also don't feel bad because I tried my best. I slept well and it really didn't stick with me. I defended a molester of a stepdaughter. She crawled into his bed when he was half asleep. Was he lying when he said that he was so tired that he didn't realize it was her? I don't know. Hard to mistake a small 13-year-old for her 200-pound plus mother, but had just worked a double shift and he was in his bed. Not hers. But I had to present the argument. The prosecutor has to prove that it happened beyond a reasonable doubt. Convicted. 1-year sentence. The only client I ever refused to represent was in family law. Husband wanted custody of kid. Wife was suicidal depressed. The guy was joking about how much his life would be easier when she finally healed herself and how much he was looking forward to it. When she went to the bathroom to slit her wrists, he waited outside for an hour hoping she'd have the guts to do it. She didn't go through with it. I refuse to represent the ducker. I may be a hired gun, but I do have some small standards. I'm not a lawyer, but I have worked in several law offices and am married to an attorney. My husband does personal injury mostly, and what he really hates is having to negotiate down child support arrears in order to get his clients their payouts. He's got a son from a fling a while back, and doesn't have a great relationship with his son's mother for a host of reasons. But he's never missed a single payment. Even when he was navigating law school and I was on disability trying to raise our own newborn daughter. So he thinks deadbeat parents, defined as folks who have chosen not to pay to spite their exes, are scum of the earth. And if he had his way, he'd redirect their settlement payouts to that instead. He also hates learning that a client is a sex offender, and has said it makes him physically ill to interact with those clients. There is, I think, a sense of pride in a job well and professionally done, tempered with the OMG I just put a, insert crime, back on the street in the community where I live. One must always keep in mind that we are responsible to them, not for them. It made me feel 10k to 75k richer. Wife's cousin was a defense lawyer and is now judge. And he had several high-profile cases defending some people who had done pretty low stuff. I asked him about it and how he feels about doing that job. He looked at me, shrugged his shoulders and said, just know that the system works. What I got from that answer and knowing him was that he was playing his part in the system that will convict and punish these people. And he was okay with that role. Let's say that when he lost those cases, as he would inevitably, he wasn't losing any sleep over his clients doing time. I really have no issues with it. It's just a job you do, and whatever they allegedly did is just words on a piece of paper to me. If something happened to me personally I'd feel different, but I just separate my personal feelings from whatever they're accused of. Of course I'd never personally associate with these people or ask them to babysit for me. I'm a lawyer but not a criminal defense attorney. When I was a law student, I did an internship with the Army JAG and got to watch court martials. I asked the defense attorney how he handled cases where someone was accused of doing something horrible. He said his job wasn't to get the accused off, but rather to make sure the prosecution did its job of proving its case against the accused before the judge or panel, JAG term for jury, made their decision regarding the person's guilt. Question: what if you know they did it, like they confessed to you in private or something, but they are about to walk out free for some reason? Like, the police never found the weapon, DNA etc. Would it be against the rules, ethics, conflict of interests for the defense lawyer to let slip some detail that gets them convicted? Or would you just be labeled a crappy defense lawyer? Getting a fast ticket to unemployment? It would be a clear ethical violation. The lawyer would be sanctioned, possibly disbarred and sued. Additionally, the client may have a reason to appeal any sentence based on the attorney's unethical behavior as a due process violation if the state benefited from it. My best friend is a lawyer who works for the federal defenders, the people who represent those on death row as a last line of defense before execution. First, they do not make a lot of money. They aren't in it for that. They are in it because they don't believe these people need to be held, particularly in such a horrendous way like lethal injection. A firing squad or hanging is more humane. She actually changed my view of the subject. These people did horrible things. Not trying to justify that in any regard. But a lot of the times they were also screwed over by a corrupt system or made an example of. Almost all are severely mentally ill or disabled and grew up in absolutely sickening cases of abuse. Sadly, it is very rare they win a case. So yeah. She calls me anytime she is ever alone in a parking lot. It's made her 100x more paranoid. But there's also some sense of doing what's right even when everyone else is against you. Nothing. Really. You become really desensitized from stuff. You're focused so much on the case, client management, judge management, etc. that you don't have time to worry about that stuff. Especially when constitutional violations are in play. That being said, I avoided the public defender's office so that I could choose my cases and don't have to take child rapists, etc. Tennessee has a new slowpoke law. I could never represent one of those monsters. I ended up getting out of criminal law because you just get tired of dealing with the scum of the earth. Whether it's your clients or not. That criminal courthouse is a ducking train wreck and it gets old.